By 7:12 on Monday morning, I was standing in my kitchen with my work badge in one hand and my phone in the other, listening to a police officer ask me a question that made my entire body go cold. "Ms. Donnelly, did you give anyone permission to take your vehicle out of Franklin County this weekend?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the coffee I'd poured 30 seconds earlier and watched my hand shake so hard that it splashed onto the counter. "My name is Claire Donnelly. I'm 34 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I work as a clinical trial coordinator for a hospital network where details matter, documentation matters, and I assumed it was fine can ruin people's lives. That's probably why I keep my life tight, scheduled, and locked down." My car wasn't some luxury trophy. It was the first expensive thing I ever bought without help, guilt, or strings attached. A dark blue Toyota Highlander hybrid, paid off 6 months early, spotless inside, and absolutely off-limits to my family for one very specific reason. Every time I gave them an inch, they acted like I'd signed over the deed. I had said no before I left for the weekend. Clearly, calmly, more than once. By Monday, that same car had been towed from a private marina 2 counties away. There was an $1,800 bill attached to my plate number, and the police were calling me before I'd even had my first sip of coffee. What shook me most wasn't that they'd taken it. It was that somewhere between my final warning and that officer's voice on the phone, they'd decided I would clean up the mess again. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The weekend had started with the kind of calm that only exists right before something goes wrong. Friday afternoon, I was at my dining table with my laptop open, color-coded audit notes spread around me, trying to finish a batch of trial documentation before Monday's sponsor review. My life runs on systems, checklists, timelines, backup plans. That's not because I'm uptight. It's because when you grow up in a family where chaos is always one bad decision away, order starts to feel less like a preference and more like oxygen. I already knew my weekend would be tight. I needed Saturday to finalize my reports, Sunday to prep for the week, and Monday morning to arrive at the hospital early, clear-headed, with my car exactly where I left it. Then my mother called, and the second I saw her name, I knew whatever peace I'd built for myself was about to be treated like a resource the family could draw from. She started sweet, which is always how it starts when she wants something she already suspects I'll refuse. She said Megan had been talking all week about taking the kids somewhere special before school started getting busy, something outdoorsy, something fun, something they'd remember. She kept her tone airy, but I could hear the setup under every word. I didn't wait for her to land the plane. I asked, "What do you need?" She laughed softly and said, "Claire, don't say it like that." Then came the request. Megan's van was still in bad shape. Dad didn't trust it on the highway. They wanted to take my SUV for just one day, maybe overnight at most, so the kids could enjoy the lake, and everybody could have a nice family weekend. I said no immediately, calmly. Not sharp, not emotional, just final. I told her I had already planned my weekend around work. I needed the vehicle available Monday, and I was not comfortable lending it out. There was a beat of silence, and then the tone changed. It always changed the second she realized guilt would have to do the heavy lifting. "It's not like we're asking for the moon," she said. "It's one car, Claire, for your sister, for the children." The children. In my family, kids were often used like emotional crowbars. If you didn't surrender fast enough, someone would mention them, and suddenly your boundary was recast as cruelty. I repeated no. Then she asked why I was still hung up on old incidents. That irritated me more than I let show, because people only call something old when they don't want to pay for it in the present. I reminded her that Megan had damaged my car before, returned it late before, ignored the gaslight before, and laughed about all of it after. My mother's response was exactly what I expected. "You always make everything sound so dramatic." 10 minutes later, my father texted. He never called when there was still room to pretend he was the reasonable one. His messages always arrived like a follow-up memo after my mother softened me up. "We'll only need it Saturday. Then, I'll drive. Then, I'll refill the tank and have it back clean." I stared at the screen and felt that old, familiar frustration rise in my chest. It didn't matter what I said. In their minds, my no was never an answer. It was simply the first obstacle in a negotiation I had not agreed to enter. So I answered more clearly than before. "No one is taking my car. Do not use the garage code. Do not touch the spare key. I am not joking." I sent it to both of them. A few minutes later, Megan called. No hello, no warmth, just irritation, already fully formed. She said her kids were excited. She said I was acting weird. She said I wasn't even going anywhere fun with the car. So what was the problem? I asked her why she kept speaking as if my ownership was an inconvenience rather than a fact. She scoffed and said, "God, you act like you're guarding a Bentley." I said it wasn't about luxury, it was about respect. She said that word in a mocking tone, repeating it back to me like I was some kind of self-help podcast. Then she shifted tactics and started making it personal. She said I had become impossible since buying the car. She said I thought having a stable job and a paid-off SUV made me better than everybody else. She said maybe I liked saying no because it gave me the chance to feel superior. That part hit harder than I expected, not because I believed it, but because it was such a familiar family trick. When they couldn't get access to what I had, they attacked the motive behind keeping it. I told her this conversation was over. She said, "Fine, be selfish." I hung up, but the mood in my apartment had changed. Work was still on the table, the same notes were open, the same audit deadlines existed, but concentration was gone. I kept thinking about the garage code. I had shared it months earlier during a winter storm when my father helped me bring in a shelf from my car. I had meant to change it after that, and never did. That oversight now sat in the back of my mind like a loose wire throwing sparks. Before bed, I checked the garage camera from my phone, made sure the spare key was still where I'd left it, and locked the mudroom door even though it opened into the garage I already considered secure. Then I texted my friend Nora. "They asked for the car. I said no 3 times. It still feels like they're not hearing me." She replied almost immediately. "They hear you. They just don't think your answer applies to them." I lay awake longer than I should have after that, staring at the ceiling and replaying every word. The thing that unsettled me most wasn't the request itself. My family had always asked for too much. It was the entitlement underneath it, the unspoken assumption that if enough pressure was applied, I'd either cave or get blamed. Somewhere deep down, I knew the real danger wasn't that they disagreed with me. It was that they had stopped treating my refusal as something real. Monday morning arrived with the false promise of normalcy. My alarm went off at 5:45. I showered, got dressed, packed my laptop, and went through my usual routine with the efficient autopilot that kicks in on important work days. I had a navy blouse on, my hospital badge clipped to my jacket, and coffee brewing while I reviewed a checklist in my head. Print the enrollment deviation summary, bring the updated binder tabs, confirm sponsor arrival time, leave by 6:50. Everything felt structured, timed, dependable. Then my phone rang from an unknown number and something in me tightened before I even answered. It was too early for spam, too early for random mistakes, too early for anything good. I picked up and heard a man identify himself as Sergeant Lowell from Perry County. His voice was professional, not aggressive, but there was a kind of neutrality in it that instantly made my pulse jump. He asked whether I was the registered owner of a 2022 Toyota Highlander with my license plate number. I said yes. Then he asked if I had authorized anyone else to drive it out of Franklin County over the weekend. That question didn't even make sense to me at first. I actually frowned and said, "My car is at my house." There was a brief pause, just long enough for dread to enter the room. Then he said, "Ma'am, your vehicle was towed late last night from a posted fire lane at a private marina near Buckeye Lake. We're trying to determine whether this was an abandoned vehicle matter, a civil dispute, or unauthorized use." I felt my skin go cold. I walked straight to the mudroom and opened the garage app with shaking fingers. The log loaded instantly. Saturday, 8:13 a.m., garage open. Saturday, 8:16 a.m., garage close. My mouth actually fell open. I don't mean as an expression. I mean my body reacted before my mind caught up. They had done it. After every clear no, every direct warning, every message I'd sent, they had gone into my garage, taken the car, and driven it out of county like my refusal was just decorative. I asked the sergeant who had been with the vehicle. He said a family group had been associated with it, and one of the adults had told deputies they had permission from the owner and always borrowed it. That sentence changed my anger. Up to that point, I had been in shock. But hearing that they had not only taken my car, but also casually fed police a false version of my relationship to it, made everything sharper. They weren't confused. They weren't embarrassed. They were managing the narrative in real time and assuming I would eventually absorb whatever cost landed on me. I asked where the vehicle was now. He said it had been impounded and was accruing fees. Then he added another detail, one that made the entire situation feel even uglier. The woman initially identified as driving did not appear to have a valid current license. My stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down on the hallway bench. Megan. Of course it was Megan. She had lost her license months earlier over some unpaid citation she kept waving off as paperwork. I had no idea she was still suspended, but I believed it instantly, because my sister collected responsibility the way other people collect junk mail. Ignore it long enough and pretend it isn't yours. I asked the sergeant to repeat that part, and when he did, I looked around my perfectly ordinary kitchen and felt like someone had punched a hole through the center of my week. This wasn't a case of my family borrowing my car and bringing it back late with an empty tank. This was legal exposure. This was risk with my name attached to it. This was my insurance, my registration, my plate number, my liability, all tied to choices I had explicitly refused to endorse. The sergeant asked again whether anyone had my permission to use the vehicle. His tone remained even, but the question now carried weight. I knew what sat on the other side of my answer. If I softened it, if I made room for ambiguity, if I used family language instead of accurate language, then everything that happened after would become my burden by default. The fees, the fallout, the fiction. I opened the group text thread and reread my own message. No one is taking my car. Do not use the garage code. Do not touch the spare key. I looked at the timestamp. I looked at the garage log. I looked at the officer's number still active on my screen. And then, strangely, I got calm. That was the moment I understood how much my family had always depended on my hesitation. They counted on me not wanting to embarrass them. They counted on me preferring peace over precision. They counted on me translating what they did into gentler words because I was the organized one, the responsible one, the one who could be trusted to handle things. But sitting there in my hallway with my work bag at my feet and my coffee going cold in the kitchen, I realized something that felt both obvious and overdue. If I lied to protect them now, I would be volunteering for every consequence they had earned. So I said, carefully and clearly, no, No one had my permission. I denied the request in writing. I have messages and access logs to prove it. The sergeant asked whether I would be willing to send screenshots. I said yes. He asked whether I wanted the incident documented as unauthorized use. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my voice didn't shake this time. Yes, I said. Document it. He told me I could meet him later at the impound office and give a formal statement if needed. After I hung up, I just sat there for a few seconds, staring at the wall like it might offer a version of reality where this hadn't happened. Then the anger came in full, not explosive anger. Worse. Precise anger. The kind that lines everything up in order and sees the entire pattern at once. They had asked. I had refused. They had taken it anyway. They had involved my name in a police matter. They had allowed my suspended licensed sister to drive it. They had lied to deputies. And somewhere in their minds, they still expected me to show up and fix it because I always had. That was the part that hardened something in me. Not just what they did, but how confidently they assumed I'd carry it. I texted Nora one line. Police called. They took the car. It's an impound. She called me immediately, but I let it ring out. I couldn't talk yet. I was too close to something changing in me, and I didn't want to interrupt it with comfort. Instead, I forwarded the screenshots to the sergeant, put on my shoes, picked up my keys to the backup sedan I rarely used, and got ready to drive to the impound yard. On the way out, I paused long enough to look at my own empty garage. It wasn't just the absence of the car that got to me. It was what that empty space represented. Proof that in my family, my property was still treated like shared equipment the second I turned my back. The garage looked wrong. My whole life suddenly looked wrong. And underneath the shock, one cold thought kept repeating itself. They finally went too far. The impound office sat behind a chain-link fence beside a towing yard that looked like every bad decision in central Ohio had been parked there overnight. I arrived with a folder in my bag because paperwork calms me down, and because I'd finally learned that people who lie with a straight face tend to lose confidence when someone else arrives with dates, screenshots, and copies. My car was there, mud splashed up the sides, a sticky ring on the center console, crushed crackers in the back seat, one of the second-row cup holders snapped clean off, and a smell like French fries and sunscreen trapped in fabric. It wasn't totaled. That almost made me angrier. If it had been destroyed, at least nobody could call me dramatic. Sergeant Lowell met me in the office first. He took my screenshots, the access log, the text refusing permission, and the garage camera still of my father walking toward the side door Saturday morning in the same ball cap he'd worn for 15 years. He asked whether I wanted to press charges. I told him I wanted every statement documented before I decided anything else. Then the side door opened and in came my mother, my father, and Megan, all with the same offended expressions people wear when reality has failed to honor the version of events they rehearsed in the car. My mother started talking before she fully crossed the room. Claire, this has gotten completely out of hand. Not hello, not sorry. That line. Out of hand. Like the problem was the existence of consequences and not the theft, the false statements, or the suspended license issue. Megan looked tired and furious, the way people do when entitlement finally collides with paperwork. My father tried the reasonable tone first. We were going to explain. Sergeant Lowell cut him off. He said, "You can explain now." Then he set 3 forms on the counter and started asking questions one by one. Who accessed the garage? Who drove the vehicle? Who left it in a posted no parking fire lane? Who told deputies the owner had granted permission? Watching that happen felt surreal, not because I'd never imagined them cornered, but because I'd never seen them unable to talk their way around a situation by making me the emotional one. My mother said she thought I wouldn't mind once the kids were already excited. The sergeant wrote that down. Megan said everyone borrows each other's cars in families like ours. He asked whether that included borrowing a car while your license was suspended. She stopped speaking. My father claimed he had driven most of the way, which might even have been partly true, except the marina security footage had already been reviewed, and the deputy had noted Megan exiting the driver's side when they returned to the vehicle Sunday night. That was when the air changed. Not because they were embarrassed, because they realized they had lost control of the story. Sergeant Lowell explained that based on my documentation, the unauthorized use report would remain in the file. He said charges were possible, though the prosecutor would consider my wishes and the specific facts. He also said the suspended license citation for Megan would proceed separately, as would the false information notation from the deputy interaction. Then came the part I didn't expect to enjoy as much as I did. The tow clerk slid a printed total across the counter. Towing, storage, administrative fees, after-hours hold, and cleaning assessment because the vehicle had been left with food waste inside. $1,812. My mother turned to me instantly, like muscle memory. Claire, just pay it and we'll sort it out later. That sentence might as well have been the family motto. I looked at her, then at the clerk, and said, "No. The people who took it can pay before my vehicle leaves this lot." My father's face hardened. "Don't do this," I said. "You already did." Megan muttered that I was humiliating her. I said, "You drove my car on a suspended license and lied to police. Humiliation isn't something I'm doing to you. It's the shadow cast by what you chose." For the first time in my life, nobody had a comeback ready. The clerk asked who was paying. Silence. Then Sergeant Lowell, without changing his tone, said that if they wanted the matter noted as cooperatively resolved on the financial side, now would be an excellent time to settle the bill. My mother started crying, sudden and theatrical, but the room had moved past tears. My father pulled out a credit card, got declined, swore under his breath, then transferred money from savings while the clerk waited. Megan had to sign a written acknowledgement regarding the suspended license contact and the inaccurate permission claim. My father had to sign the release authorizing payment of fees tied to the unauthorized towing incident, and my mother, who had spent years acting as if intentions erased impact, had to stand there while every choice was translated into ink. When the receipt finally printed, the clerk handed it to me, not them. I folded it carefully and put it in my bag. Then I asked for the garage code on my parents' side door opener back, the spare key they had taken, and the reimbursement for a full interior detail and replacement cup holder. My father said I was pushing too far. I said, "No. For once, I'm going exactly far enough." By the time I drove away, Megan was on the curb arguing with her insurance agent. My mother was furious that public accountability existed, and my father had learned the expensive difference between access and permission. That was the first moment I realized revenge doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like refusing to rescue people from the consequences they designed for you. You would think that would be the part that gave me peace, but peace came later. That afternoon, I got my car professionally detailed, replaced the broken cup holder, changed every garage code I had, disabled the old lockbox, and had the side door keypad reprogrammed before dinner. Then I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and let the quiet hit me all at once. People talk about boundary setting like it's empowering from start to finish, like the second you stand up for yourself, the sky opens and a choir starts singing. That was not my experience. What I felt first was grief. Not because I thought I'd done the wrong thing, but because I finally understood how much of my adult life had been built around pre-managing other people's selfishness. I'd been planning conversations before they happened, softening my no, offering explanations no one had earned, adjusting my weekends, my budget, my energy, even my tone, all so my family could remain comfortable while ignoring me. I opened my notes app and started listing every incident I could remember that had been treated like not a big deal. The missing security deposit I covered for a month and never got back. The time Megan volunteered my guest room to a cousin without asking me. The prescription pickup my mother insisted I handle during a 70-hour work week because you're the organized one. The furniture my father borrowed and returned scratched. The holiday dinners where my schedule was mocked as cute little hospital paperwork, right before someone asked me to solve their latest emergency. By the time I stopped typing, I had more than 3 pages. That list did more for me than any pep talk ever could. It turned vague hurt into evidence. It showed me that the car wasn't the whole story. The car was just the first time I refused to blur the facts so everyone else could keep feeling innocent. Around 6 that evening, I wrote one email. Not long, not dramatic. No therapy language they could weaponize. No lines about protecting my peace that they'd sneer at and call social media nonsense. Just facts. You took my vehicle after I explicitly denied permission. You exposed me to financial and legal risk. Today you paid the towing and impound fees because those costs were yours. Effective immediately, you no longer have access to my home, garage, or vehicle in any form. Do not ask to borrow money, property, or time from me until I choose to revisit contact. If you show up uninvited, I will not open the door. I read it twice before sending it. It felt colder than the speeches people give in movies. It also felt true. My mother responded first with 3 paragraphs about how heartbroken she was that I could reduce family to transactions. My father responded with 1 line, "You are punishing us over a misunderstanding." Megan texted separately to say I had ruined the kids' weekend memories and acted like a stranger instead of a sister. I did not answer any of them. That silence was harder than arguing. Arguing had always let me believe we were in a conversation. Silence forced me to accept that what they wanted was access, not understanding. Later that night, Nora came over with soup and a bottle of ginger ale because she knows I forget to eat when I'm upset. I showed her the receipt, the signed acknowledgement, the garage log, the list on my phone. She read quietly for a minute, then said, "You know what this really is, right? They're shocked the family mule kicked the cart over." I laughed so hard I nearly cried. Not because it was funny, because it was the first honest sentence anyone had said about my family dynamic in years. The backlash came in waves. First it was guilt. Then it was image control. Then it was panic. On Wednesday, my aunt called to ask why my parents were so upset, and whether I had really forced them to pay some crazy impound bill. That phrasing told me everything. The story was already being edited for relatives, poor parents, cold daughter, unfortunate misunderstanding, everyone heartbroken except the woman with spreadsheets for feelings. So I stopped protecting them. Not with drama, with precision. I said, they took my car after I said no in writing. Megan was driving on a suspended license. Police were involved. They paid because they were responsible. My aunt went silent, then said, "Oh." That tiny sound did more work than a 10-minute rant ever could. By Thursday, 2 more relatives had reached out, each one gentler than the last. My family had always relied on vague retellings and emotional fog. Facts ruined the atmosphere. Friday evening, Megan called me from an unknown number because I'd already muted hers. I answered because I wanted to hear whether she was finally sorry or merely inconvenienced. It was the second one. She started crying within 30 seconds, but it was the irritated kind, the tears of someone furious that consequences are expensive. She said the suspended license citation could impact her job at a pediatric dental office. She said Mom had been a wreck all week. She said Dad was embarrassed at church because someone had heard about the towing yard. Then she said the sentence that ended whatever softness I still had left for her. "You could fix most of this if you just told them you overreacted." I actually smiled when she said it because there it was, perfectly distilled. Not, "I'm sorry I stole your car." Not, "I put you at risk." Not even, "I was wrong." Just fix this for me. Become useful again. I asked one question. "Did you ever plan to tell me the truth before the police called?" She hesitated. That was enough. I told her no one had destroyed her week except the version of herself who believed my ownership did not matter. Then I added something I'd never said out loud before. You are not the victim of my boundary. You are the victim of your own entitlement. She called me cruel. I said, "Cruel would have been letting you keep doing this until someone got hurt." Then I hung up. An hour later, my father left a voicemail saying I had made my point and now needed to stop this before the family breaks apart. I listened to it once and deleted it. Families like mine always talk about breaking apart when the wronged person stops cooperating. Somehow, they never say the family was breaking apart all those years they were standing on one person's neck to keep everyone else comfortable. The visible consequence came Sunday. Megan's employer found out she'd missed a mandatory staff training because of the Monday impound mess, and then learned there was a license issue attached to it. She wasn't fired, but she lost the company role that involved driving to school outreach events, which meant lower monthly pay and a humiliating conversation with her supervisor. My mother blamed me for that too, as though my silence at the marina had somehow placed Megan behind the wheel without a valid license. By then, though, something had shifted. Their version of me as the reliable cleanup crew had expired. I wasn't rushing in. I wasn't smoothing things over with relatives, and I wasn't translating their choices into kinder language for public consumption. I had become dangerous in the simplest way possible. I was willing to describe what happened accurately. Once people understand that about you, the whole family system starts rearranging itself. My parents stopped dropping by. Megan stopped calling. The emergencies dried up almost overnight. Funny how many crises disappear when the person everyone exploits finally closes the door. 5 months later, on a cold Saturday just before sunrise, I drove that same Highlander east on I-70 with a fresh coffee in the cup holder that had been replaced, a research podcast playing low, and no knot in my stomach for the first time in years. I wasn't on my way to rescue anyone. I was heading to a medical conference in Cleveland, one I said yes to because I finally had the energy to think beyond survival. Work had changed for the better in ways I didn't expect. Without the constant background drain of family drama, I was sharper, calmer, and more ambitious. I took on a larger compliance portfolio, got put forward for a senior coordinator track, and stopped apologizing for being good at what I do. My apartment felt different too. Not quieter exactly. Cleaner. More honest. The kind of place where objects stayed where I left them and weekends belonged to me. I'd had minimal contact with my parents since the impound incident. A holiday card from my mother with a vague line about healing in God's timing. One short text from my father asking whether we could move forward like mature adults, which is apparently what people say when they want absolution, without an inventory. Nothing meaningful from Megan. And honestly, that silence taught me something I wish I'd learned 10 years earlier. Real love does not panic when you remove unauthorized access. Real love may be hurt, confused, even imperfect, but it does not immediately transform into debt collection, blame, and character assassination the moment you say no. The biggest change wasn't legal or financial. It was internal. I stopped feeling compelled to explain why I deserved basic respect. That shift is hard to describe unless you've lived without it. It's the difference between negotiating for air and simply breathing. Sometimes people ask whether I regret involving the police. What they usually mean is, do I regret forcing the truth to become official? No. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the people who should have cared about my safety treated my property like community equipment and my labor like a family utility bill. But I do not regret the moment I stopped volunteering to be used. The truth is, that Monday morning didn't ruin my family. It revealed it. And once something is revealed clearly enough, you finally get to decide whether you keep calling it love just because it came from people who share your last name. The first time I drove that car alone after everything happened, I realized the part of me that felt guilty had been trained, not born. Guilt had been the leash. Accuracy cut it. So that's the lesson I carried with me. Love that depends on your obedience is not love. Help that is demanded, not requested, is not help. And the moment you stop explaining why you deserve respect may be the exact moment your life begins to feel like it belongs to you again.